It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with one another, with Seth and I, they were few and very far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish, he let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them that I was the talented brother who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him, and he easily was the best friend I've ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought too much about it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even with his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all the time as well, because there was never any light coming from underneath the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sorts of stuff, and that's likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was a lot closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, and going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would always walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice. I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whoever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He was never angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this strange behavior, and with no signs of it stopping anytime soon, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was a long time before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I'll just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep very far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged this person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I pleased. The person didn't respond. I kept sending them messages, asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he forced a very weary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and there was still no answer. My parents eventually had to pick the lock on the door, but when we walked into Seth's room, he wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information about just what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up, and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him down. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history, other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's, and the conversation was horrid. The stranger was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me, and he would never hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me, and Seth refused and argued with him, pleaded with him to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother quite a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could be having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages and found that each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had signed out and signed in on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavily on my brother all those months, and I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid he was actually going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother and I love him. I could never be scared of him. My fraternal twin brother and I shared a room. I think both of us would have preferred to have our own room, but our dad used our extra room for a study. He was a lawyer and needed it as his office at home, I suppose. Anyhow, I slept on the top bunk, and my brother slept on the bottom. The worst thing about sleeping on the top bunk is that I tend to have to get up several times at night to go to the bathroom. I guess I must just have a small bladder or something. I also drink quite a lot of pop, which probably has a lot more to do with it. It might also have to do with the fact that my brother tosses and turns all night and wakes me up over and over again. When I was 15 one night, when I went to bed, I noticed that my brother had already gone to sleep before me. I had intended to stay up and read for a while, but I couldn't turn on my light if my brother was already fast asleep. Instead, I took my Android up on the top bunk with me and decided to play some games on my Nintendo app. I played an old Dragon Warrior game with the sound off. Right on cue, no less than an hour after I had gotten into bed, my bladder started telling me that I had to get up. Trying to be as quiet as I possibly could, I placed my phone down, got up, and went to the restroom. I did my thing and then came back into the room. When I opened the door, the light shone in my room for a second, and it must have bugged my brother a little bit, because he grumbled something, flopped over, and then was quiet again. I quietly apologized, but he didn't reply. Trying my best not to wake my brother up once more, I climbed up the ladder to the top bunk. I noticed when I got up there that my cell phone light was blinking green, which indicated that someone had sent me a text message. I picked up the phone wondering who could be sending me something. When I tapped the screen, my blood froze in my veins as I read a text from my twin brother that simply asked, "Hey bro, I'm gonna be out late with my girlfriend. Can you cover for me?" At first, I thought it was a joke. My brother could have sent the text to me from the lower bunk when I was using the bathroom. It was the sort of thing he just might have done. I slowly texted him back. I thought that if he texted me back, I would be able to see the reflection of the light on the wall. I asked him if he was joking. Immediately, he texted back and said, "No, why would you ask that?" I didn't see any light. I answered and said that I'd just seen him sleeping in the bunk below me and that I didn't find this funny at all. The text back from Ian was almost immediate. He told me that it was definitely not him in the lower bunk, and if I was not joking, I had better get out of that room immediately. Scared half to death, I grabbed my phone, skipped the ladder, and jumped off the bed and ran for the door. Despite my better nature, when I opened the door, I had to look to see who was sleeping in my bed. Part of me still suspected it was Ian just playing a joke on me. However, when the light shone on the bed once more, I found that it was empty. No one was there. Freaked and confused, I turned the light on. No one was in the bed. I slowly crept over and looked underneath. No one was there either. I checked the closet. No one in there. I guess the fact that there was no one there should have made me not scared. Somehow, it was scarier though. I ran out the door and went to my parents and explained what had happened. I hated to throw Ian under the bus like that, but if there was an intruder in the house, I thought that was definitely more important. My parents and I searched the entire place, but we didn't find anyone or anything. I wasn't able to go back to sleep until Ian got home. It was too creepy. I never knew what I saw in that bottom bunk that night. All I know was that there was definitely something there. I was sort of a third party to this story, and didn't quite get the full experience. However, the parts that I was party to were frightening enough on their own. When I was 16, I had an older brother, David, who was 18. I was very much a homebody, but David was the type who always had to be out and about doing something. He was very rarely home. He also had this tendency to go through groups of friends very quickly. Every couple of months, he'd be hanging out with someone new. I didn't really care for most of David's friends, but there was one guy that I did find really interesting. He wasn't at all like most of the people my brother hung out with. He mostly hung out with a rich and popular crowd. It would always be people who spent all of their time cruising around in their father's car, and things like that. But he had been hanging out with this guy named Will, that I actually did find interesting. Will was a lot like me. He was one of those pale guys who dressed in all black. Not quite goth, he didn't do makeup or any of those sorts of things, just kind of dark, and he was really interesting to talk to as well. Whenever they were at my house, and if my brother was in the bathroom taking a shower, which he did almost 4 times a day, or on the phone, Will would sit right there next to me and talk to me. A lot of the time when I was in the living room watching horror films, Will would sit there and talk to me about death scenes and such. It was actually a lot of fun. The first time I was a bit put off from Will, though, was when I was sitting and talking to him one night while my brother was showering. He thought that I looked like I was depressed and asked me if anything was wrong. I told him no, I was just feeling pretty blah that day. I never really could get myself going. "Oh, well, I'll show you something that you can try if you're having a boring day and need some excitement," Will told me. While I was sitting there, he rolled up the sleeve on his black button-down shirt. He had all sorts of scars on his arms, and they were all in weird patterns. He then took out a pocket knife and flipped it open. He began cutting himself with the tip of the knife. I cringed as he did it. He kept wiping the blood off on his shirt. He was sort of half wincing and half smiling as he did this. When he was done, he showed me the design. I couldn't even tell you what it was supposed to be. His arm was just covered in blood, and even then it was probably just something he'd made up as he went along. I watched as Will then took some bandages out and pressed and taped them on the wound. He looked at me and smiled when he saw the questioning look on my face. "Oh, I keep this stuff with me, 'cause sometimes, I just have to do it." Now you may think this would have put me off liking Will, but it really didn't. No, I didn't begin cutting myself, and I never wanted to. But it made me even more interested because he was so very different from the other types of guys I knew around that time. About 5 days later, though, around midnight, my brother drove up the driveway and came into the house. My parents on the weekend had a job putting up those direction signs that showed people where to go to see new subdivision housing, and they were gone all night doing that. David looked scared and was holding his arm tightly. "Where's the shotgun?" he asked me, panicked. "Why the hell do you need the shotgun?" I asked. "Because if Will and his fucking friends come here tonight, they're going to try to fucking kill me, and I'm gonna do it first," he told me. "They're into some witchcraft crap, and I don't know what the hell they've been doing." I let my brother know the shotgun was in Mom's room on the closet shelf, unloaded. He ran to get it. I was very confused, and even more confused when another car suddenly pulled up outside. It pulled into the driveway and left its lights on, shining directly at the house. I got up, not really scared because I didn't believe all of this. I looked out the window. 3 men wearing some sort of weird robes and holding knives were standing outside the door. I recognized one of them as Will, and his face was bleeding from obvious fresh cuts, much like the ones he'd made on his arm. The look on his face, not a smile, not a frown, was just plain evil. For the first time I was scared, but then my brother burst out with a shotgun. He opened the door, and at first the three men were walking towards him. Then they obviously saw the gun. I'd had enough of all of this, and I just went and called 911. While I was in the other room, I heard the gun shoot off, and shortly afterward I heard the car doors slam and the car left. I hung the phone up and walked back into the living room. My brother laid up against the closet door, holding that gun for all he was worth. I asked him what was going on, but all he told me was that Will and his friends were into some weird witchcraft stuff, and they had been threatening to kill him that night. He refused to tell me much of anything else. That was back in 1992. I can't tell you what happened with the police because I don't really remember, but I do remember that after that, I never saw Will again, and I'm pretty happy about that. Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. You never really caught anything big in these creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to, and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found this absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful, and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We set our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something that we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge, and it was quite deep as well, so we decided to put outside the fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I don't really know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off into the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned out into the trees. "There's someone out there in the woods watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there spying, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck us as odd as it was extremely warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face, but the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or a shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew we were trespassing. We never really knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up till this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our older brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there. My middle brother suggested we just try to get over to our stuff and take it and leave. However, this was daunting, because that was the side of the creek the man was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles and our clothes. She started grabbing them up, screaming, "Mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of them in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much. "Hey, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved towards the shore, he began moving closer and held his gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property," my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us. "He's not going to shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving toward the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the woman saw him and took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you," she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now, the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood, cold in the water, with this man pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the man said one thing to us: "Get." We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got the hell out of there. It sucked because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet, but we were too scared to even consider going back. Fortunately, we did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us there were some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time before we were brave enough to go fishing again. What is up, guys? Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked what you saw, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure you hit that little bell notification and set the notifications to all so you can be notified whenever I make a new video. As well, I'd like to thank my friend Killer Orange Cat for helping me out and providing the stories that I used in this video. He does very good true scary stories as well, and he always has original stories that nobody else has read before, so if you like this kind of stuff, you'll definitely like his stuff. As well, guys, if you're not already subscribed to my second channel, you can find a link in the description below the video. I'd recommend you check it out because this weekend I'm going to start doing some readings on there. I'm going to be starting probably with a web novel called Chrysalis, which is one of my favorites. I'll probably read chapters 1 through 10 or so and update that every couple of days. Let me know what other sorts of web novels you might like me to read and that sorts of stuff. I'll try to get permission from the authors and get to work right on that, because that sort of stuff is really fun. As always, the links to all my social media will be in the description of the video below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Be sure to message me on any of those, and I will try to respond to you as quickly as possible. If you guys would like to send in a story you'd like me to read, please be sure to send me a message on any of those. If you decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what type of story it is, how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in, and what the title of the story is, if it has one. Please make sure if you do decide to send in some stories that they are grammatically correct as possible. Special thanks to my artist friend Alan, who does all of my art for this channel. He also made the art for my second channel as well, and he started up a new series on his own channel that he's been linking in the comments, so if you like that sort of stuff, be sure to check him out. He has some good stuff there. If you're curious about the music used in this video, it's listed in the description below in the order which it appears in the video, and I also have links to the artists as well. I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.